This is a recording for the CUPHAT project, Coastal Uplands, Heritage and Tourism. My name is Daniel Carey. Today is the 25th of July 2023 and I have with me here Damian Howard. Thank you, Damian. Can you confirm the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
I am, yes.
Thanks, Damian. And can you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Damian, Damian, Howard, Damian Howard.
Lovely. Thanks a million. I thought we might start by just asking what your earliest or first memories of this place or this area are.
I suppose, like a lot of people who would have been born in Dublin from country parents, you would tend to visit the home place. So my mother was from here in Michael, and my father was from O'Brien's Bridge, near Ardnacusha on the Shannon. So this being the nearest place, just outside Dublin, we would have called down here to visit regularly. But I suppose my strongest memory, it's a little bit crazy, but I remember a helicopter. I think I was about 6 or 7, and I remember for some reason, I don't know whether it was part of the Troubles or whatever, but I remember there was a noise outside, and we'd been staying here for a few days, and it was at night time, and I remember there was a massive noise outside, and it was getting louder and louder, and we all went out to see it, and there was spotlights shining down on the house, and it was a helicopter very close, and all the trees were blowing, everything was blowing, and it was kind of doing a search, or it was doing a pass through, and there weren't many helicopters in Ireland at the time. But that's my strongest memory and my earliest memory that I would have. Whatever else we did down here, I don't know, but I remember that, and that's my strongest memory.
Have you any idea what was happening?
Again, I suppose it was probably early 70s. I think it was before the Border Fox and all that kind of crack that was going on, kidnapping and stuff. But it has to have been something to do with that. We weren't involved in anything, and it wasn't after us. 6-year-olds don't get up to that much trouble, but certainly the mountain areas here, like mountain areas, would be an area where people would be able to move about a little bit easily, maybe training and stuff like that. We don't know. I've no idea, but it was to a child looking up and having you blown away. It was an incredible sight, and of course something important like that sticks in your mind.
So was it a place that you would have visited regularly, kind of through your childhood?
Yeah, we would have visited, a lot of family places. As I say, both down near the Shannon and here. But we came at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. But we would have come down in the car. I grew up in a small house in Dublin, terraced house. But the father, he would have always grown vegetables. We even had chickens in Dublin. He would have always been involved in growing plants, growing vegetables from his early youth. He used to do a lot of that, and so we'd come down here, and that was pre-EU. So there was a tradition of everybody had a paddock, everybody grew their own stuff, everybody had pigs, everybody had chickens, everybody had cows, everybody were self-sustaining to a certain degree, and here was no different. So the paddock out there would have had vegetables, root vegetables. So needless to say, when we go back, we'd always go back with a sack of turnips, potatoes, different bits and pieces, depending what was available, what was grown. And my father was particularly big into growing plants and roses. So we'd go back with a big bag of horse manure or cow manure, and that would be for the roses, because he'd make liquid fertilizer from it, and that would be for his roses. So the boot was always full, and sometimes there was hardly enough room for me in the back, but that was just the way it was. And they were always very generous here, and so there were the early memories of any place where we would have gone to see family. And in some ways, while people were self-sustaining, we lost elements of that. I know there's kind of reaching back now in some ways where people grow their own, and post-recession, post greater awareness of biodiversity, it's good to see it come back. But something was lost. A lot of hard work, much easier to go down and buy your spuds in the shop or whatever, and I can understand people doing that. But we kind of probably lost a little something, and we probably lost a little period of our heritage, which we may or may not get back, but it's probably you can reteach and you can relearn and stuff like that.
Was your upbringing maybe more rural than Dubliners today? Was there that sort of, in terms of your father kind of growing his own and that kind of thing? Is that something that's changed, do you think, or were you atypical among your sort of own peer group?
To a certain degree, I think typical in a sense that there were a lot of people would have had country parents, so there would have been visits back, but I think a lot of it depended on geographically where you were. Like, remember, to go to Cork was like 5.5 hour drive, and well, I would have family in Cork City. It was a journey to get there. Now 3 hours, in and around that, depending where you're going. So people who were Kerry parents, they would rarely go down. People who are within an hour and a half from Dublin would go down more often, or more likely to go down. So we would probably, on my road where I grew up with lots of kids, there would have been some family connections, but and they would have gone down, but sometimes it dies out, obviously as people get older. So yeah, because we were coming here more regularly with a connection. I also had my aunt who was born here as well, Katie. She would have married and grew up in Tipperary. So I think in the earlier days, I don't know much about this, but I know that there was a tendency that people would go and stay with family, even in the country, between relatives. And it's no different with me. They would have sent me down here. And I think I ended up getting dropped off down here, and I stayed a night, and then suddenly I was here on my own. I think I was probably in my 9, 10, 11 or something. But I think the parents had to come and get me after about a week, because I don't think we took to each other. But I remember staying here. It was the only period of time I remember staying here on my own with them. But then there was two bachelors and a spinster, and maybe the dynamic was a little bit different. So I ended up being rediverted the following year to Tipperary, and because there was people there were a little bit closer to my age, not children, but they were 10 years older than me, I kind of took better there, because they, the aunt and the Uncle Bill. So I spent probably from 12 to 15 summers, 8 weeks in the summer and 2 to 3 weeks at Easter time working on the farm down there. So in that sense, it kind of worked its way into me. So I'm not, it's not alien. It was never alien to me. It was normal. Be a cattle and go getting the cows, calving and elements of that. I wouldn't be great at any of that part of it, but husbandry and stuff. But I would have got an exposure to it. But I've always made an impression, and I wasn't afraid of hard work. I like work, so it kind of was a marry, and then there's no shortage of work, so they bet it into you. And that was it. But it was the making of me, in fairness, And
how did you end up living here then?
Well, it was never planned, really. My mother passed away in 2012, and it certainly wasn't planned, but I suppose a number of things happened then. We were still coming out of a recession. I would have set up my own business prior to the recession in kind of construction and project management, quantity surveying, that kind of thing. So everybody got hit, and particularly construction got hit, and so at that stage you're kind of still digging your way out of it and recovering from it. So it probably altered my perspective a little, but it was still not on my radar. So initially I thought, around the time when she passed and stuff, and then I thought, okay, well, this kind of place was kind of in the family, and there was other bits of land here and stuff, but it was all going to be got rid of. So I ended up buying it, off the family, and in that sense, then initially it was probably planned, or as the wife would say, as a place to come down and go holiday in. I probably had a more advanced ulterior motive, consciously or subconsciously. So I kind of said, we came down here and we're doing a few bits, but it needed radical work. But we did stay here for a number of weekends, and it was a great way to get a feel for it and feel for the area. And really, it was a step away from Dublin. and step away to do things differently. So what I usually say, whenever we're talking about it, is I was determined not to do the next phase the same as I did the previous phase. So if you're working crazy hours, like 40, 60, 80 hours, I was going to do it differently this time. Still not afraid of work, still working more than harder than ever, but in a different way. So the difference between, as I would say, the difference between here and Dublin is when I walk out, having grown up in the housing estates, when I walk out in Dublin, or you walk out in Dublin, you're looking down or ahead. When I come out here, I'm looking out or up. I'm looking beyond the building in front of me. I'm looking at the mountain behind me, across the fields across from me. The world is bigger. There's a bigger pair of glasses down here, and there's more space, visually, and in how you live and how you function. And then, of course, the community down here are very good. They're good people down here. They're resilient people. People in rural areas have to be. Farming people have to be resilient because they have had to dig it out from the ground and create it. So they're good people down here, and they're hard working people, and they have a lot of respect for that. And a good community, historically a strong community, So
you'd have had some knowledge of that community, presumably, but how much knowledge, or how many, like, were there many people that you would have had kind of strong connections with before you moved, or?
No, not really, because they had no children here, as in there were 2 bachelors and Spencer, and they didn't have any children. They would have had their cousins, and generational cousins, and then children of their cousins, but there was no connection as you would normally see a connection to an area in that sense, other than, like, I have a cousin here, Patsy, and when we came down initially, I asked for his help with a couple of things, because obviously we're in a rural thing. We ended up getting donkeys, so I had to get hay, so I reached out, and Patsy was helpful in sourcing that, and it was great help. And there were different things that I had to do down here, so people are helpful, once you respect them, and once you reciprocate, and once you're metal, or be there for people, and I think they work together. So I think that was my introduction, and then I got asked would I give a hand, because of my background, would I give a hand with a community project, and it kind of grew from that, and then it kind of snowballed. But I had familiarity with an element of working in community before, so because of that, I was open to that. My father as well, he was a good community person, not in an organisational sense, but he was the person that people came to. Certainly, to gardens, or to like a key holder for the house, or check on this and that kind of thing. And he was always obliging, and he always had a sense of community. Again, probably from his rural background, growing up in a small village or a small area in his part of the country.
Have you a standout memory from that early period after you moved down, or
down here? Standout period.
Maybe no equivalent to the helicopter, but is there something less dramatic?
Nothing that, like, there's been lots, and it's great. It's a little crazy in a sense, but there's been lots of things. It's been very busy. Some ways a little too busy, because I'm busy at some of the right stuff, but most of the wrong stuff for my own stuff, my own interest. But it's like anything. It's like, if your husband's a carpenter, you ask him to hang a shelf, he'd be the last person to actually have that shelf, but he'll hang out everybody else's shelves. I'm a little like that. When I'm in, I'm all in. Sometimes a little bit too in terms of I can be a bit intense, because I'm fairly focused on things and getting it done to the best that I can, and people will always do better, and that's fine. No, lots of little things, a hell of a lot of little things. It's a great space down here. It's a great village. They have a lot of community space. So, like, what they've done here over the generations really is phenomenal, and what they continue to do. So I can't say there's one thing. There's lots of small things, but it's not one overriding thing. But yeah, that's be it.
Tell me about some of the projects that you've been involved in.
Well, I suppose initially when I was asked to become involved, it was they were successful in getting some town and village funding, and it was called the Paths project, and it was a project that they conceived where it linked an existing park with the Adelaide Church, so you have two religious communities, and it was about basically putting a new path in through the Adelaide to lead up to the door of the church, and that would connect with an existing path in a park called Toba Breda. So it was like a cross community project, albeit the local group Maisha Mutinatira it was going through them. So they had this project coming up, and there was also a number of additional things. There was a couple of statues, one for St. Finian, one for St. Columbanus, and there was another couple of little things like that. So because it was a construction project and there was tendering, and so I ended up, they asked me would I get involved. So I got involved in that, and unusually we got all the funding and we procured it and managed it ourselves, so that no problem to myself. But a lot of communities would be under pressure with that kind of thing, but it was just down my street. I had to do it all the time. So that was interesting. Huge amount of work involved in the sense that we had archaeologists, we had all of the proper stuff was done, the national monuments, and there was architects, conservation architects to put the path in. But we ended up getting a limestone path because we had to put a formal application apart from the initial feasibility, and I helped put that together and put the budgets and all that together, and we got it, and we were successfully completed it. And it kind of ran on with a number of projects of a similar vein, town and village, and there was a whole led up to a lot of individual projects getting done on the back of the success of that, because it was a community that could and community that delivered. And I think if you can deliver, and if people see you're able to deliver, and it's a success, well then success can draw success, or at least it can show that you have a plan. And so that was kind of how we got involved.
Yeah,
how it was.
And tell me about the Columban Way.
Columban Way. Well, the Columban Way is a very interesting project insofar as I wasn't involved in the early stages of it, but there's different stories go around with how it initiated in Michael from various priests or bishops or different people who would have had an involvement at the very start, and our community as well. But St. Columbanus is a 6th century saint who was born in the area of the Blackstairs Mountains, Wexford, Carlow, no counties back then. So it's theorised anyway that he's from the area, maybe not from the village of Michael, but from the area. So back in 2015, I think it was his 1400th anniversary, maybe 1500th anniversary, a bell was coming over from Bobbio, where he was buried, and it was coming to Bangor, where he had spent most of his life before travelling through Europe. So as part of that process of the bell visiting, that kind of lit a spark. That's what I would have heard was a spark within the community in terms of this saint, one of several saints who are from the village, but this saint and who had basically travelled from here up to Cleanish, over to Bangor, and in his 50s headed off with 12 monks to Europe, landed in Brittany, and zigzagged through France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Liechtenstein was in their mix there as well, and down to Bobbio, Italy. But along the way he would have been very influential in terms of his teachings, because Ireland, because it had been, we'd say, saved or distant from the Roman Empire, it had maintained a certain purity in terms of religious practice, whereas following the demise of the Roman Empire, it was much more fluid, much more, well, we'll marry, we won't marry, and all that kind of stuff that went on in Italy and other parts of Europe. So he brought what was probably a strong belief system, and that resonated with a number of the monarchs throughout Europe at the time, and he ended up being granted lands, and he would have set up very significant monasteries in Luxeuil and in Bobbio and Bregenz and various other places. So there's a lot of towns named after him over in Europe, and his teaching, he would have written to the Pope and given out to the Pope. So he was very vocal, very strong, very firebrand, you could say, to a point in his belief system. So but he believed in communities, or believed in countries and peoples working together. So in that sense, he was about, as again, communities, about everybody pulling together and not be divisive or dividing. So much so that he was one of the inspirations behind the formation of the EU, and he said he's like a patron saint of the EU. So Schuman and the early foundation fathers of the EU quoted and referred to Columbanus as the inspiration to forming it. So that's kind of who he was, and again, in terms of our involvement with it, what had been advancing, and no one would have known most people wouldn't have known in Ireland, that there are walking trails following his route and his journey through Europe that's snaking down towards Bobbio in Italy. So what became very apparent is why the missing Irish link between here, where he was born, and where he left from was missing. So that kind of sparked, in the early days with us in 2016, 15, 16 into 17, about a walk. So we started to organise walks here, and then we got very good support from Carlo Tourism, Eileen O'Rourke and Michael Brennan, and Director of Services, or it wasn't Director of Services I think at the time, but got involved with the project, and they were fantastic support, and then very good support here, friends of Columbanus Michael, and we set about holding this annual walk and looking to see about funding, and we managed to get funding with the help of the council, and we've signposted the whole of the county, and we're kind of nudging our way into Kildare at the moment, and we're now part of a larger north-south project, and basically it's about following in his journey up to Bangor, but your modern twist is less about purely spirituality, but it's more about mindfulness, and it's about exercise, outdoor, reconnecting communities. So we are the main community group involved in that, and we're just recently back from Switzerland, where we met with other groups in other parts of Europe, again about that project, but also each area throughout Europe every year, usually in July, they have different events celebrating Carlo or Michael or Wexford or Blackstairs Mountains, wherever he's from, celebrating this guy. And he still today has a significant impact in these places. Churches and towns and villages are named after him, and they know he was an Irishman. We didn't know necessarily on the grand scale of things. People had forgotten, or people didn't know, because he had a bigger impact there, because that's where he went to. So that's kind of so our involvement is with that project, and we work with other communities, and we're kind of it's a great opportunity for an element of rural regeneration, low impact tourism, and also just for looking into our past to maybe look at the future and see what things can be. So
yeah, that's it. You mentioned tourism there. When you have visitors yourself, or you people ask you for recommendations about things to see and do locally, where do you bring them, or what do you suggest to people?
Well, Carlo's not unusual. There's other counties in the country, but we're obviously landlocked, and just again something that I bang on about. We used to have a coastline, and then because it was such an impenetrable area, when the English at the time got the chance, they cut off the coastline, so it isolated Carlo. So Carlo itself is surrounded by Wicklow, Wexford, Kilkenny, Laois, and Kildare. So we're landlocked somewhat. So because of that, we've no coastline. We've no necessarily big ticket items, tourism items. There's no Rocket Castle here. There's no Newgrange. We don't have the coastline. We don't have a significant big ticket tourism item. But what we do have is we do have rivers. We do have the River Barrow, which is a significant asset to the county and the country. We do have the Blackstairs Mountains, and we do have our relationships with the counties around us. So in that sense, we have quite a lot in our spaces. So what do we normally say? Well, certainly, it starts off with that infrastructure. We'd say, well, the River Barrow is fantastic. There's lots of very nice places to visit, and plenty of activities along the Barrow. But equally in the mountains, we have the options of cycling, mountain biking, running, walking, hiking, all of those activities there. So from activity point of view, we're very well placed. Whereas the the strapline for Carlow tourism is currently wander off the track. So really it's an opportunity for people to wander off the track. We've fantastic locations in the south of the county. St Mullins is fantastic. It's a wonderful site. The Mullicon Cafe down there is particularly good. And it's just, you walk down there, you're in a different space. It's just, when you walk down there, you're in somewhere special. Burris, Rahana, like I can name all the villages and towns along the way. Loughlin Bridge, Bagnallstown, all the way along. They're fantastic villages. Clonegall, there's fantastic villages and towns throughout the whole of Carlow, and they're quiet. There's lots of little nuggets in them. So really, you could lose yourself here comfortably for a weekend or a week. And what we've noticed, people chatting, we've noticed people, particularly foreigners, visitors, we'll call them, they don't know county boundaries. So when they look at a map, they're Carlow, Wexford, Kilkenny, Derry, Donegal. They don't look at county boundaries. They look at locations they're going to and roughly positioning. And Carlow is unique in a sense that where we are probably in 1 hour direction, almost from any direction. You can be in Dublin, you can be in Wexford, Waterford, Kilkenny, all the way around to Cashel, maybe not quite Cork, but you can spin on doing day trips. And particularly tourists who can base themselves here, and they go to Dublin for the day and come back, and they can base themselves here. And then when they're here and they say, we don't fancy travelling, then they visit the little sites we have, like Altamont Gardens, or Brownshill Dolmen, or the Arboretum, or keep going on. There's loads of fantastic sites. But even here in the village, when people come to visit the village, they walk down and they see the Adelaide Church, or they see Tober Breed at the parks. We've got phenomenal amount of green space here, and they got even people down in the village, 2 villages away, would say, I never knew that was there. There's a lot to find and discover if you just take your time and slow it down. We're not all, and no offence to Paddy Wagon Tours or all these tours, we're not all clicking, pull up at a thing, take a photograph, move on. They don't last in the memory, and I doubt they even last in the cameras or the phone-ins. But when you get into the skin of something, and when you take time and talk to someone, if you're walking or if someone's leaning against the wall and you say, how's it going? And you could have a chat and you wouldn't know where it'd lead. And there's many stories of that where people could end up staying with them, or people could say, go up here or whatever, is there a place to camp? But you can camp in my field. Now, it's not always that way, but a lot of the time you will, but you have to kind of slow yourself down a little and understand that people are at different paces. They're not working any less efficiently, but there's a different pace. Their head's in a different place, and sometimes you need to slow down to get under the skin and just get a feel for what it's like. And that's where you get in touch with people, communities, nature, maybe.
Probably leads on from that, but who would you describe as your ideal visitor to the area?
Ideal visitor. See, there's all kinds of categories, and they keep changing all the categories, and they call them different titles. I can't even think of them, Great Explorers and all these kind of titles that Fáilte Ireland develop. And I understand the reason they do it, because they have to try and come up with categories so you can aim to try and meet those and market to them. Ideally, I think there's something here for everybody. It may not be always at the same time, in the same way, at the same time of year, but there is something here for everybody. Countryside can be attractive, like I know you mentioned Mary White. Mary would get a lot of people, she get hens going down to her. Now, it's not the hens as you think, the hens that might go to a city or a lively nightlife place. It's an alternative thing. It's people being with people. So that you do get hens and stags coming to rural locations to be in self-catering accommodation, have some beers, have some crack, go for a walk or whatever, and that works fine. Is that the majority? No, but there is something there for those people, and they're welcome. You take young kids, and someplace hill walking may not be for very young kids, but there may be other activities, like there's plenty of parks and so there's something for everybody. But I suppose typically you would probably look at people who are looking to discover a little, who have the time to discover and to wander around and see the sights. Older people to some degree who would have particular interest, they've some very successful activities, events in Carlow. Eileen runs, like we've Snowdrop Week here, which is actually now Snowdrop Month, and there are people come from all over Europe to come to that, like from Amsterdam, who are particularly, it's a niche market and they're into snowdrops, and they are quite phenomenal when you see them in Altamont, and we're trying to get our own little bit of snowdrop heaven going down here. So there's that element. You've got Burrs Literary Festival, is a festival that was on there I think last month, and that's a fantastic success. It's a weekend event, and you could be sitting beside Michael D. Higgins at it. You could be sitting beside actors and different people, and this is accessible. There's a bit of a fee to it, but all these different topics being talked about. There's such a wide variety of niche things that would be of interest. They'll always find something. But I suppose, and then you have your outdoors. Like we organise, as I was saying earlier on, we organise an annual walking event, and we had 47 at one we did there about 6 weeks ago, and 3 months prior we had 60 people, but we have people who are passionate about walking, Camino kind of walking, so 25 kilometres a day or 20 to 25, and they're passionate about it, and they're very interested, and they're very appreciative of what we do, and we get a lot of positive compliments thanks to the hard work that everybody does, the team, the community centre, everybody does. So in that sense, that market is there. Something for everyone, to be honest with you. But sometimes people don't know what they want. And I think it's about taking time and covering less ground, but maybe covering it a little bit more thoroughly, and just taking time and get into the rhythm of the location, and you'd be surprised what you discover, you know. That's my thoughts anyway.
That idea of just the starting the conversation, or saying hello to the person you meet on the road, as you say, that it might just be a pleasant, very short exchange, or it might lead somewhere.
And like it's to some degree it's a difference between Dublin and I won't pick on Dublin, a city and country, because if you're in people don't tend to say hello to each other that much. People of an older generation will say hello. People of a younger generation less so. Or people generally don't initiate. Now, if I'm going up to Dublin, right? If I go back to Dublin, where I grew up and lived a lot of my life, I would say I'm saying hello to people because I'm saying hello to people down here as a greeting, and people do say hello back at you. Some people look at you strange, but it's such a melting pot up there of different nationalities and different people that you'll actually find that other nationalities will say hello to you because that's what they do in their country. So it's kind of it's kind of shifted a little, because whether you have people from Syria, or people from South America, or people from all over India, anywhere, they'll say hello to you because that's what they do in their own country. Prior to that, it would be harder to get hello out some people. But I suppose it's more. Down here you say hello to people generally all the time. Anybody you're walking in the path, you're saying hello, and if you know them, you can be in a chat with them, and as you say, or as we were both saying, if you just talk to someone and they'll chat for a bit and move on or whatever as any conversation goes, but you never know. Like one time I was down in Killarney years and years and years ago, went away for a few nights, and myself and a friend were walking through Killarney, and there was no room at the inn. There was no bedrooms to be got in the whole of Killarney. Busy period. We didn't know, little silly, stupid or whatever. And we were walking around like a baby Jesus, right? We were walking around looking for a stye to go into, and this old man come up the street. He says, "Are you looking for accommodation?" And we got chatting to him, and he says, "Looking for accommodation, come up to my place." We ended up staying up in his house, not in his bedroom, in a spare bedroom. I got the bed, but he got the floor. But we ended up staying there. But that came out of a conversation with someone, and that's how things can happen, because people can be helpful. It could be someone visiting on a bike, and they might have a tent, or whatever, and they're just cycling there and sort of looking for a place to stay. Talking to no one won't produce it. Going in somewhere, wouldn't be the right thing to do without permission. But someone say, "Listen, Asher," they talk to you, get a sussy, they see that you're okay. They say, listen, come over to my place in the garden, you can stick it up there. That's connection. once it's not taking advantage of its connection, you know.
We're in the shadow of the Blackstairs Mountains here. Do you have a favourite spot in the uplands that you like to visit?
I'd have two. I have two spots. I'd have one is the Nine Stones, and it's a viewing point that's it's accessible by car, and some people would say it's a little bit like being in La Paz in South America. You drive along too close to the edge, you might fall off it. But it's a well known viewing spot around here, and on a fair day you can see 8 counties. But then equally, if you go up that bit further up to the top of Mount Leinster, to where the mast is, that's the tallest mountain in the Blackstairs, you can see the 8 counties, but you can also see Wales on a clear day. And I think that's probably the most most connected spot I'd feel, particularly because you're looking at the same view that people would have looked at for thousands of years. And like anybody, when you see something you can see in the distance, you want to go there. So I would like to think that a place like Wales, where you can see, or the counties that you can see, that you would have ventured out and gone to those places to see who's over there, what's over there. And I imagine thousands of years ago that's what we did here, whoever was here. And I think that's a connection and a reach out, and I think they would have probably stood at their mountain and looked over, and then that's trade, and that's people, communities working together. So I think that would have happened. My other spot would be behind us is CUPHAT is another mountain, a smaller mountain behind us, and down in the area there's a place called Rossacurra, and up around there we would walk down through there a couple of times, and when you're down around that area, that's where cousins of mine would have been from, going back to 200 years or more. But it's kind of a special space when an old farmstead, and there's little or no buildings down, but there are trees there that would have been planted a couple of 100 years ago. Not very many, but there's a few, and it's just so peaceful up there because nobody's not really being farmed. It's forestry, or kind of continuous cover kind of forestry up there, and it's just a nice little spot that no one really is going to. There's no creature felling going on, there's no mountain bikes coming into it, and it's just a peaceful little spot. Harsh place to be in the snow 200 years ago, but it's a lovely spot. They would probably be the two spots that were locally near here that I would, apart from the parks and stuff in the village and
sure.
everything,
Yeah. Can I ask you a little bit about maybe how the area or how the village has changed, I suppose, and thinking maybe about two elements here. One being maybe how it had changed from sort of what you had remembered in childhood, and also how things have changed during your period living here.
Well, I suppose in terms of childhood, because I would have visited, people who are from here would have greater accuracy in this, but there were 3 pubs, or 3.5 pubs, the half being a small little shebeen that the younger people would have drank in down the end of the road here in Church Road or Hill Road. I suppose we're fortunate, and fingers crossed we're fortunate, that while we have lost 2.5 pubs, we still have a pub. It's a good pub, good people. So we're a population of a village is a population of 300, a parish of 2,000. So in terms of scale, you get the feel for that. But in that village of 300, there's this church here, still has mass a number of times a week. There's 3 shops. 2 of the shops have petrol pumps, so we still have petrol and diesel in the village. There's a post office still here, run by Vincent. Shops run by Pat Nolan and Rose and Anne. We've a health clinic here, which opened up I think in the 90s. And we've a Garda station for 2 hours a week, but it's still a service that's here. And we've a national school here. So in a sense, we've quite a lot here for a small parish of 300, where there are probably a small village of 300, whereas there are a lot of villages who'd have 300 or even more who wouldn't have anything like what we have. So I think that's a testimony to the village. I think it's also, would it be the case if a housing estate wasn't built here and there was some additional social housing added, not added? in various things. So the population, if it hadn't been had an injection of 150 plus, would it be the same? I don't know. Difficult to see. Economics, children buy, parents buy. People would shop local. Like I make it my business to utilize as much of the different shops in different ways as I can. Post office, the pub has a shop, so I go in there and you might use the off license, or you might get down to get milk and bread and Pat Nolan's. So you're always trying to give a bit of business too. You couldn't do your main shop there, but you would certainly always get your essentials, and you'd be surprised what they'd actually have. Like if you think it'll be in Pat Nolan's or it'll be in Roberts. It'll be there. You wouldn't think it, but they'd have a wide selection of stuff. So in that sense, that's what's here in that way. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, no, it was actually going to touch on that it strikes me that there are and even on this project, I would have spoken to people in areas where they remember the post office and the Garda station and the shop and the pub, and maybe they're all closed or a chunk of them are closed. So it does strike me that there's still a lot of those kind of key community elements are still around.
I think, and again, it's just my own observations, I think it helps that there's a school here. I think that's a big help. Although I would, like with all those things here, you could think of other locations, and like pre-famine there was a village called Killedmond, and that is gone completely. No evidence whatsoever, hardly of anything, and it just disappeared during the famine. Rahana is a village that had two pubs, as one pub now, and they have a little bit of shoppy thing going on, but it's not very much. But it's a lovely location, but its population would be very, very small. And so you can name a number of locations from Fay up the road, Gary Hill direction, and that's like Maishel and Fay would be the parish in a sense. But there's a school up there and there's a church up there, and they still have mass, and there was kiddies going to school. There's no shop up there, but they would come down to the shop here, or they could go into Burris or into Fenna. I think it just depends. I think our location works for us to a certain degree. We're on the edge of our Carlow. We're practically right on the border. So in that sense, it probably helps a little bit that there's maybe this area has to be serviced in some way. So maybe the health clinic helps with that, and it's great to have a doctor 5 days a week down there, and nurse and district nurse and whatever else is down there. So I remember all of that, but I think the part I remember that isn't there, and again, it's only from my visits down or to my mother or whatever, and when we'd attend events, is the church is a less of a player in things, and for I think nationally, worldwide, it's like that. It's the same. It was the same in Switzerland. It's similar, and I think that plays a significantly smaller part in community or in space. Aging priests and fewer priests and that's continuing its slide. And again, it's the same everywhere, every country, it's the same. That's my learning from recent travels. That's the biggest change. I think that church plays a bigger part in it, and there were a lot of, while the community centre is there and there's a great community spirit, there was kind of, the two were kind of working together and one fed the other in some way, and there was a population, and that's an ageing demographic. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like the air is being let out of a balloon, and I think the community is still there, people are still there, but the constants is changing, and that's going to be interesting in terms of everywhere. It's going to be interesting how that bottoms out, or where it bottoms out. But yeah, we're blessed, resilient community.
Yeah, can I ask about that sort of community spirit and that resilience that you talk of?
Well, I think you'll find it generally in mostly in rural, because less so in the city, because cities, like having grown up in the city, it's just a series of streets, so you don't know where one community starts and the other community ends. And when you grow up, you might be aware of that, because you'll be in, it could be Crumlin or Drimna, or it could be Turner or Hallscross, it could be Rathgar, Rathmines, it could be different parts of Tala. You'll know where roughly your geography is and where your line is, probably through attending school or voting and all that kind of stuff. People who move into an area from a different country haven't a clue, and they just see it's Dublin, or they see it's Terranure, but they wouldn't know where one bleeds into the other, because it's all built up. Because there's those villages and Rolling villages, it's just one big sprawl. I think in rural, it's clearly identifiable. You know where the village is. You have a good idea where the parish boundary is, and communities, tribal, we'll say in a sense, and certainly the GA and the teams reinforce that insofar as you know where your colours are, and you know where your tribe is, and you're playing against your local villages. That's much more easier and much more identifiable. So in that sense, so I don't know, I've lost the train of thought.
Not at all. Yeah, that community spirit and.
But I think here, like there is a good community spirit, and it's when at times when, like if there's a funeral and unfortunately someone passes away, there's a great community group, a community centre, the hall committee, and they rally, and like, you know, if there's is to be dealt with in the hall after mass, and you know, whatever's required, they're there. All volunteers. The voluntary spirit's still alive in the country, and I think, you know, in general everywhere there's usually good voluntary community spirit. The question is whether, you know, how much people can contribute, or if it's a space that they want to be in, or depends on sometimes who is involved or what's involved, you know, with it. So in that sense, yeah, there's a good community spirit, and there always has been here. That's my understanding of it. From my mother would have had an awareness of that, and people would have done their bit, whether it's volunteer bingo in the hall. I would have had uncles who would have been doing that. Again, I would have had uncles who were part of the original group Maishimuch and Atir that was founded here back in the 40s, and that was set up to basically to try and, you know, have communities work together, and, you know, to try and accomplish things, probably around the time of electrification and things like that. That was one of the first projects I think Maishimuch and Atir would have been involved in, was electrification, rural electrification. Get one plug and one plug socket and one light bulb. That was your thing. So that rolled out from here and other communities all around the country. Back when Ard na Crusha gave 98% of the country's power, now it just gives 2% of the country's power, apparently. So yeah, there would have always been that involvement. I think, has it changed? A little, but I think life moves a bit faster. The GA is a big part of the community. It also consumes a big part of the community. Insofar as it's all attentions on GA or Camogie. Fantastic Camogie team, by the way, here. Fantastic. Phenomenal. No offence to the lads, but I'd much rather go and look at some of the girls playing, because they're fantastic. Great passion, great energy, and they've won the county title for the last 28 years in a row. Like, these are phenomenal ladies. But so yeah, that's very strong. But I think maybe things change a little bit. You know, it's an age. Always volunteerism community is an aging demographic, unless a new estate comes in. And I'm not saying that a new estate should come in. I'm just saying it's a different dynamic. I remember years ago I got involved. I fell into being involved with community development in Dublin, and it was around the time of when there was a kind of war on drugs in Dublin, and we moved to an area, and they had been the tail end of that, and they were looking to help a local guy in the corner who was addicted to drugs and whatever, and there was a meeting in a hall. But I ended up involved in a few things, and we ended up a project that was setting up a resource centre. But as part of that, you'd be on different committees and different things. And I remember talking to the person was the head of community development, and we were talking after an event, and he said to me, he pulled me aside, he says, there's no such thing as community. And it always stuck in my head, because it wasn't my space. I didn't understand, other than I was there to hand out leaflets. I ended up playing a big part in it. But he says there's no such thing as community, and this was the head of community development. So it kind of was an eye-opener into the mindset of that particular person, not all people's in public service, but it was just, that was the mindset. And I think it was, well, really, you're in the wrong job, Sunshine. You should maybe leave your job or go somewhere else. But there is community, and I think community takes many forms, and I think community shifts and moves. And I think communities, when hard times or when difficult times, like COVID strike, you see community people come out, and people giving come out. And I think there, unfortunately, it takes such a big negative impact event to bring the best out, or for people to step forward. But here, if snow hits here, and we don't get bad snow too often, we might get it more than other people at times, occasionally. But snow here, whatever, 4 or 5 years ago, and we were snowed in. Like you can't get up the hill in the car, and you can't get just nowhere. But the road had to be cleared to get milk out of a farmer up there. But he got the JCB, cleared it. But you had people going delivering to people who were isolated, and that's where they pulled together. But you had that in the city as well. So people will step forward. So I think it's an evolution. It'll be interesting to see where it'll end up. But I think, I think there always is community. There always has been community. It may change its shape, and it may fluid into something else. But yeah, community here is good. Like, I think there's 14 or 16 community groups of different activities. It could be social history, it could be bowls, it could be aged group, older people. It could be the Great Flower Club. It could be Hall Committee. It could be Maisha Mucha Natira. I forgot. Vintage Blackstairs Vintage Rally, tractor runs, all these kind of things. It's actually only really this year, or even middle of this year, that some of them have just come out again after the COVID, and it took a while, and we've lost some people, unfortunately, along the way, and some people mightn't come back into it, and that's fine, and hopefully new people come into it. But I think sometimes the bigger challenge is to get people involved again, or is to get new people in, especially if they felt they couldn't become in. So I think that's a challenge, but I think it'll rise up to it eventually.
How or did COVID kind of change people's sort of relationship with place or that kind of thing? I know in certain communities maybe the 5 kilometre restriction or the other kind of restrictions on movement maybe introduced people to what was on their doorstep. Was that a feature of life here, or were people kind of already fairly familiar with what was around them?
I think people had an awareness of what was around them. I think probably those. I think you have to look at it in terms of due to the 5k or 5 mile restriction. People did tend to stay within that, but it depended where their 5k started from, where their centre point was. So I think most people in the village probably stayed more in the village, and so from an exercise point of view, we're fortunate within 5k you can be up in the mountain, so we could be up in the hills. So some people might walk up there and make it up to there. I think people did walk. You saw a lot more people walking the roads and walking around. Down at the bottom in one of the green spaces in the village, we've a kind of a linear forest. I call it a linear forest. But through that, one of the guys, DJ, had cleared some branches, and it wasn't a walkway, but people found their way in there. And even combined with a dry summer, they found their way in there, and they actually started to walk through that forest trail. We've subsequently put a proper path in there now, and the bridges and stuff like that. So we've actually taken what people had identified as a walking route when they were looking to not walk on the roads but walk through the grounds, and they even threw branches down into where, which would have been a kind of a low level stream, so they could walk across and jump, breach the distance. And then they threw in little culverts, and they threw more branches down, so they were able to walk through, and this became part of their daily routines. But they identified it as a walk, as a natural continuation of a walk we have in the Millennium Park. So with Town and Village Funding 2020, we had identified it doing something there anyway, but we put it in there last year, and we now have we've basically taken what they brought. So in that sense, people became a bit more aware of what was here in the village. But I think our location, the one thing that struck me, because I did have to go up to Dublin for approved work, I saw queues outside super values, queues outside supermarkets. We never queued for anything in this part of the world, because we had, where we are, our nearest supermarkets were Bunclody, Tullow, Bagnallstown, or into Carlow, but we couldn't go to Carlow per se. But because we're so well serviced in the village, our shop is excellent, shops are excellent, and a pub and that kind of thing, but obviously not during COVID. But the shops were there. Any of the larger towns that are only 10 minutes away, that we had to go for a weekly shop, there was never queues. Tesco was in Tullow, Lidl, Aldi, whatever, no queues. Supervised, no queues. We didn't face any of that. There was no. Once people got over that initial settle down, stop stocking up stuff, it just settled and it worked and it just was fine, and people were happy. People, well, for the most part, apart from maybe a bit of isolation between family units, people were comfortable, and you'd see guys, these farmers would meet at the. They can meet in the village. Want to be social distance, one car and the other car, talking across the car. You had a lot of that happening, and some of that still continues. I've seen it in Kildavin. Farmers, there are two cars and they're meeting where they would have met during the COVID, social distance. So you had that happening, or people would chat. So I think it impacted where isolated, where people couldn't leave their homes, and the old elderly community, or those who had to stay away because of medical conditions, they probably suffered a bit more. But then again, people called, or we set up a hotline here. Our local PP set up a hotline, and a number of us were on it. We don't even know who was on it. It was that kind of thing. But
this was just an invitation to call if
it was a hot number, if anybody needed anything. And there was a rota, and there could have been 5, 10, 25, 100 people on it, I don't know, and we didn't need to know, but you got your slot and you manned the phone. I think it was diverted, the number was diverted to your phone, and you were on it, and I think I only had one call, but if anybody was stuck and it went out, the word went around the community. So that's an example of community pulling together. I forgot about that, but yeah, so we were there, and if anybody needed anything, and equally, we would say to neighbours, and particularly those that might be a little isolated. So in that sense, that's COVID was a hit in the way it hit everybody, but I'd much rather be here than stuck in Dublin and stuck in an estate, or walk around and everybody walk across the road, because to maintain it. Oh jeez, no, I'm so glad I wasn't in Dublin.
How would you just want to touch briefly on the kind of the idea of place and place identity? How would you kind of describe this place, or if you met someone in Dublin or Killarney and they ask where you're based, what do you say, or how do you describe it?
How to describe it? It's a special place, but it's special insofar as its location is special, its makeup is special. Like where we are in the mountains, we're so accessible to the mountains that it's parts of our steep, so you wouldn't necessarily walk up it, but you could. That's on our doorstep, so it's behind us. You can say it's behind the village, so we've access to all this space that if you're into activity, it's fantastic. But I think within the village itself, if you're limited and restricted in terms of your own movement, if you're in the village, or if you can get to the village from, let's say, the parish, there's loads of places you can walk around and get in touch with nature. It's a biodiverse environment, many different types. I think it's special in the amount of green space it actually has. And a lot of it is from a former Michael Lodge or Michael House, former the big house we'll call it. So what we kind of have, and I call it, we've a deconstructed estate, big house estate, but yet it's accessible 365, 24/7. It's accessible. So in that sense, it's a special space like that. When you see the amount of green space we actually do have, and that's manicured and planned and be developed, so it's unique. It's a special space. So it's like having a really, 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 really big garden, and only very few small people in it. We've a really big garden, and it's all accessible. So in that sense, there's loads of space, and proximity to the village is very good. Where we are, it's very good. We're just above the Adelaide. So in that sense, it's a special space. It's a special place. But funnily enough, I've been in places around the country doing different jobs and whatever, and you say Michael, people know of Michael, more people than you think of. It's crazy, because it's not a place you would drive unless you were driving locally. You wouldn't go through it unless you were lost. and that's not an offence to the place. It's a geographical thing. But I've been in Kinsale doing work in Kinsale, and I mentioned Michael, and just we know Michael, and a lot of it is down to people reasons to come here, and the particular reason we see there's a bone setter here called Dan O'Neill who's quite famous, and people have travelled all over the country. There's many's a person, I say Michael, who worked for me or worked with me, and it's oh yeah, Dan O'Neill, the bone setter, is he still doing it? He's still alive. God no, he must be 2,000 years old. But he's not. He's probably in his 90s, late 90s, I'd say, and he's still doing it to some extent, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but people know of that, and funny enough, the Column Way, people know about it because of the Column Way as well. So it's interesting in that sense. So people do have an awareness of the locality because of that. And then recently with the CUPHAT project, when we hosted the group here in the hall, and later that evening when we got together back in Wicklow, two of the lads came over and they couldn't believe, like Richie Kavanagh, it was a local singer, Ain Fokalella, that fella, and they were saying my uncle and it was an uncle that he had spoke about his uncle when we were over visiting the Shire farm over in the horse farm, and he'd spoken about his uncle and liking music and that kind of thing, and so he said that uncle who passed away, he was mad about Richie Kavanagh, and they recognised 1 second photo of Richie Kavanagh. So in that sense, sometimes places are known for more than what you think they're known, further afield than you think, and it doesn't mean that the people have to be from here to know them. So in that sense, yeah, it's a special place, and it's always surprising.
Can I ask about cultural and natural heritage in the area? Maybe first of all, what's your kind of understanding of those terms, or what comes to mind when I mention cultural heritage or natural heritage?
Cultural heritage, natural heritage. Okay, culture. Okay. I suppose first of all, I would be classed as a blow-in, but as someone else said to me, I'm a blow-in with roots. So I don't know if that makes it much better than a blow-in or whatever, but I'm a blow-in with roots. I think cultural heritage, I think it's within us. I think it's within the people in that area, whether it's from their time growing up there, or whether it's from how living there has influenced and seeped into them. So I think being aware of your culture, or the culture of your place and space, I think that's something we all have, but we may not value it. And usually it takes someone from outside to hold up a mirror and then you see it. And I think that's something that we could probably do with a greater awareness of, and maybe possibly taking it less for granted. So in that sense, so cultural heritage here, to me, would be basically things that those have come before us have done. Like, unfortunately, when we're only ever 2 generations away from being forgotten, because people will talk about their parents, their grandparents, they rarely talk about their great grandparents, and take it on from there. So really, that'll be gone, the memory of that, unless photos or recordings, and these photographs and phones are gone. They will never last. I don't care what anyone says. Print your photographs on printed copies, stick them in the brochure, and chances are they'll stay longer, or be recorded as part of a CUPHAT project, of course. So in that sense, a lot of it's gone, and it's gone from living memory. If you never ask that question of your parent or your grandparent about where you came from, or where your people are from, if you don't do that when they're alive, it's gone. And unless you've had somebody who's been fortunate enough to write it down somewhere, chances are it'll be thrown out when they pass, it'll be thrown in the skip, and those things get lost. So I think cultural heritage is how you live, the way you live, where you live, and how you interact within your community. I think that's, to me, is cultural heritage. I think, unfortunately, it's only primarily demonstrated by those tangible physical things that are left behind and that survive being knocked down and built over. And I think in Michael, there's certainly, it's evidence in cultural heritage in Michael would be obviously the village, its format, how it was built, St. Vinian's Ruined Church, the park, different things that are put up in the park at different times. That information is online, but like, you know, at least someone would say, I wonder when that was built, and they will know, and they will go somewhere as long as recordings are there. They say, oh well, such and such, and then they look at photographs. An interesting thing in cultural heritage, there was an event that we had here, and it was organised by the Hall Committee, our social history group, I think, as well. Could be wrong. And it was post-COVID, last summer. I think it was last summer. And they had a reenactment of the big house. It was about the big house, and they set up 2 rooms in a small hall, and they reenacted the kitchen area and a living area. And there was people dressed up in Victorian, Edwardian, whatever in things. There was a guy we have a local model maker who's very successful, and he made a model of the house, how it would have looked. And there was a big event, and there was vintage stuff outside and all that crack. Hugely attended, locally and from different parts of the county. Fantastic success. I say that, look, with a little bit of surprise, and only is that so many other people came from elsewhere. But they had photographs on these panels that they put down the centre of the hall on tables. And I've never seen something capture people's attention. And they were looking at them, and some of these photographs I hadn't seen before, and I wouldn't have seen everything in it by any long shot. But there were photographs of some parts of the big house and of people. And I would be familiar with old photographs and books that different groups have done, capturing of the schools, photographs of my ancestors in the schools and the bare feet and all that crack. But people were in awe of these photographs and looking at it and going, God, that's such and such. And it switched them on to what they might have. But that's cultural heritage. So they could see photographs of the school of their relatives, because small communities would tend to have people, you know, who would stay in communities for generations. Then they would see things of farming or whatever that was being done, and they remember that. I remember that. So that's all cultural heritage to me. So living it, not losing it, not forgetting it, capturing it, sharing it, putting it out there, and that's cultural heritage. Natural heritage, really, I suppose, natural, it's the environment. It's the way we live, the way we lived, the way we're going to live. That's always evolving and changing. Here, I suppose, what little I know about it, but here will be particularly, because we're close to the mountains, will be particularly relative insofar as with the whole country full covered in forestry, the influx of people here would have to clear the forests from the uplands there up to a point to make it farmland. So they would have either got the land cheaply, but they had to clear the forests, or as tenant farmers or whatever way it was worked, they had to clear the forest. And my people would have probably had to do that, be it they were Brussels Cora, be it over by the law. They would have had to probably clear those mountains to make it farmland, pull stumps up with their bare fists, and and horses or cattle or whatever. They had to pull and make that land farmable, and that's a hardy people to have to do that, and especially when you would have had to do it from nothing. So that's your natural environment, that's your natural heritage, forming and changing as things constantly change. So wind farm up there, looking to put another wind farm up there, not very positively embraced at the moment down here, but that's another change to the natural environment. But that's an impact on the natural environment for a different reason, albeit a good reason supposedly, but that's now a change of dynamic. But again, in fast forward 100 years, maybe those things will be gone, there'll be something else, there'll be hydrogen or something else that'll be done, you know, some sort of thing will be invented. But natural heritage would be that, how we lived in our life, how we lived in our space, how we impacted our space. I think that's maybe changing now. Farming is all changing now. It's moving away maybe from meat to vegetarian, whatever. It's going into a different space now. That's going to be very challenging. So that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah. What are the most interesting features of the local physical landscape?
Well, you've kind of got village and you've got surroundings. I think, well, village, obviously I was referred to the green space at the parks, Millennium Park, Tober Breda Park. We have a little small forest, which is quite a little where the stream comes down to my place into the village space or parish lands. That's an interesting little space there. So I would think that would be something. But I think it's the hidden things. I think there's Cranavan Well, which is out between here and heads to Kildavin, and it's on the left hand side, and there's an old church up there, but there's actually a well where they used to dip coffins into as part of a funeral ceremony, right? And it's a fascinating little spot, a lovely little spot, and it's real peaceful in there. But you wouldn't know it's there unless you follow the sign, but you wouldn't know to go there unless it piqued your interest. But there's lots of that around, where there are little bits of history, little bits of heritage that are around the space that I know of those, but there's many more. And the likes of our local social history group, they go for walks and they go up and they talk about this, that and the other. Some of it's creative talk, some of it's factual talk, some of it's a mixture of both, but it's all discovery of heritage and celebration of heritage, and they're very, very good. And they're a very good, strong group in it. But they keep it and they hold that kind of thing. So there's little pockets of that around. I think one of the sites, if you're up at the Nine Sons and you look down, apart from counties in different directions, it's like a bowl, and that landscape, like Coolishnochta it's called, right? So it's Snowy Vale, right? It looks like a bowl, and I don't know why, but that's and you stand there looking at it. It's like if you took, sometimes you get these screens on cameras that create this bowl effect. Well, this is a bowl effect below you, and that's kind of interesting, and how it frames right the way we can see the far side of Carlow. We can see Carlow town. Like you can see the county, see Wales and all that kind of thing from Mount Leinster. But that's a feature now that would be very strong on my mind. Probably that, and then if you're in the village and you're coming into the village from Lismaconnie, which is a graveyard, they have a grave mass, like a lot of places have annual graveyard masses. We weren't at it this year because we were away with the Columban Way project. But when you're there and you're standing beside the graves of your ancestors, and you're looking back up towards the village, you can't exactly see the village, but you can see Mount Leinster, and you can see the saddle where the Nine Stones is. So you're kind of aware that you're in the shadow of the Mount Leinster, but then equally, even though they're all dead, they're all in the grave and they're all looking up, whatever, they are in the shadow of Mount Leinster. So the village in the area, like Mount Leinster, the mountains behind us, pretty much frames the village, even because we're on the uplands, we're just on the uplands. And Michael means low plains, so it is a little boggy when it flattens out, but we're on the hill, so we don't get boggy here. It's all heading down. So in that sense, yeah. So that's they'd be how I'd frame it.
What do you know about the rock and soil types locally?
Well, it's hard digging with a pick anyway. I'll tell you that much. When I bought this place here, I was in Dublin at the time, and I was doing a bit of a course thing, and there was two lads there and they didn't have work, and I was doing up this house at the time, and this house is built straight off the ground, no foundations, so I had to get the floors taken out. So I said, listen lads, I have a week's work for you down in Wyshel. If you want to go down, you can stay down there, not great conditions, but you have to dig out the floors. So they came down here and it nearly killed them, trying to break, because the floor was concrete straight on clay on the ground, but it wasn't clay, it was this sandy, stony ground, and it nearly killed them to break it out. They gave up halfway through. It's hard ground to break out. So in terms of soil types, yeah, it's clay on a crust of, very strong ground, but stony. So there's always stones coming up through the ground. Hence a lot of stone walls built around here, a lot of them round stones. So there's a lot of stone walls around here. We see stone walls, there's a lot of stone coming up through the ground, and they're forming the ditches with the stone that they're taking out from the land they've reclaimed from when it was forestry. So we know about that. Granite, quartz, we know about that. Also more recently, because there's a significant lithium vein that runs from Dublin down to Cork, but predominantly around here. So Chinese company is bought into the prospecting here, so they're sniffing around on a regular basis. So we're quite aware of some of the geology here, And we're I speak for myself, but I'm watching it. And we're watching it, because what you have, be it, as you say, culture or natural heritage, and what it means to us, I think sometimes you'd be surprised what will and what could unite the tribes around here. The wind farm would be one of them. So people would watch. They may not say very much, but people are watching, and sometimes people will act when it becomes something as opposed to when it's nothing. But yeah, so we do have an awareness of what the ground type, but usually it's hard.
Tell me about the house, actually.
Yeah. Well, the house is here, from what I can see in terms of maps going back. It's mid 17th century. That's here since. Now it's been remodeled in the 40s or 50s. It used to be a thatched house. Was a single story thatched house. It got another floor put on it. Back when my people and my mother's people, my mother and their brothers and sisters and their parents, there were 10 living here in the house. Not unusual, like everywhere around the country. So when there was 10 living here, it was really kind of like a 3-4 room house, if even 3 room house. Main living area, the good room for whenever the priest to call or whoever to call, and then a bedroom area. Then that became a 2-story bedroom area, even though very, very small roof space. And then the living room here we're in was divided, so there was a bedroom here. So there was probably kind of 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, at least how I would have seen it. So everybody got their own bedroom in terms of the 2 uncles and the aunt. So everyone had their own space. Where we're sitting now is where would be Mikey's bedroom, and when we moved here, the floor was actually a slope, so his bed was sloped at an angle. I assume his head was at the top, I suppose at the bottom, otherwise he would have got serious blood rush. But it was actually sloped, and it was crazy. I would have never spotted it, only when we started taking the place apart to rebuild it. So yeah, so we moved here we started guttering it probably in 2014, and 2015 we had it all done. In that kind of area, that space, so it would have straightforward what we were doing. But we had to gut completely. All the floors came out, stripped the whole lot, and then we insulated, rewired, replumbed, did the whole thing. So it's a 1-bedroom house now. So 1 bedroom, large bathroom, living area, or the good room, which is doubles as my office, and then our living room here with a small kitchen. So it would have has had additions added onto it. Very small kitchen, and like built a small utility room on the back, which is basically just takes out of that space, and the sort of fridges and stuff, big fridges, freezers are out there, and washing gear and all that kind of thing. So in that sense, it's the footprint is probably the same as it always was in that sense, but as I was saying earlier, like it would have originally been an access way across the front of our house to 3 other farms, so it was probably quite central in terms of activity, and then mass paths would have come down through here. So there was at certain times, be it mornings, kids going to school from the mountain area, coming down to us heading to the school, or people going to mass on Sunday, or people accessing the farms, and that was probably more 18th century, late 18th century they would have been doing that, and they would have walked or been connected in some way. They would have been connected to the big house. They may have worked there, or they may have leased land from there, that kind of thing. So
it was probably quite a social space.
I would think so.
Informal meeting point maybe for people passing through and having conversations.
Yeah, people had time. People took time to chat. So and then working together, like the whole metal thing, or what was that phrase? Ninyart go curl Kayla, no strength without working together. I think that would have been, that had to be the way, and that was the way. People at times of harvest, or people at times of need, they pulled in together and they rubbed along and they helped each other out. So I think people knew each other on a bit more of a deeper level, but they've all gone on probably not. There would have been rivalries and all that kind of crack that still goes on in different places. But yeah, so in that sense, yeah, there would have been social, or certainly, weekly or daily social.
You mentioned biodiversity earlier on. What sort of what kind of plants and animals are there in the area, or what do you know about that?
Right. Well, I suppose we had a biodiversity action plan done here a number of years ago. We got funding from Community Foundation Ireland, which was very good. So we have a certain understanding of what's around. I think it's like everywhere really, to be honest with you. We know we've 4 types of bats in the village, because we had a bat survey done a number of years ago. We know we've got certainly, you've got a certain amount of pond life. We have a pond here, a man-made pond, or a natural area of water gathers, I would imagine, and a stream. So we know that got recently tested through citizen science. So we had a citizen science test, and it got a classification of good. It's never been tested before. It's not on any records, but that'll be going into the National Biodiversity Database. So we got a classification of good. I would think it's probably a little bit better than good, because there's not too much farmland feeding into it. It's just, but it is what it was on the day. And we're part of the Legacy. We've recently become part of the Legacy for Life project with Antashka. So we're a demonstration site. So we'll know more about pond life there. So pond life there, 4 bats. We've obviously got everything from badgers to hedgehogs, the whole that gambit. We've got some birds of prey, definitely. We've got sparrowhawks, and we've got buzzards. We could do with some hen harriers. If you know of anybody with any hen harriers, send them this way. We'll get them going up here. So we know about that. Foxes. When we first moved here, the farm outbuildings attached to the house and barns and stuff like that. But there was no one living here for between 10 and 11 years, 10 or 12 years. So when we moved into the house initially, there was a fox that had his or her daily routine, and even a couple of times a day, and the fox would walk around and go into each building, and it didn't mind us because it thought we were only visiting, but it would go up into the barns, out in and around, and it would go around, and we actually come quite close. But obviously after a while it knew we were here. But there was a family that were across the far side of the stream, a nice little settled area, and there you see foxes playing and stuff right near us, and I took that photograph over there. There was a haystack that I dumped out the back, and there was a fox, and that's in there on the haystack, but there was a magpie on the same haystack, and the magpie was standing on the back of the fox pecking him, and I only got the photograph. I didn't get the two of them at it, because by the time I went in to come out with the camera, I just captured it, and you could see the magpie to the left, but he wasn't at it, but he'd peck it, and the fox would just go away, and the magpie would be along and he'd peck him again, pull it at him, and he'd go away. And this was going on for ages. It was fascinating. So we're surrounded by nature, we're surrounded by wildlife of varying degrees, and we have tons of birds. I think I counted 25 different types of birds coming to eat on the feeders or hopping around the place. So we're drowning in the basics, and whatever else is there. No, there's no wolves here. The last wolf in Ireland was killed here in Michael. Wasn't by anybody in Michael, but there was bounties on wolves, and at the time the English brought them in, and the last wolf is apparently killed not too far away from here. So that's not a great claim to fame, but it's a claim to fame. But the local farmers don't want them reintroduced. I can be sure about that, and I wouldn't blame them, because it's not exactly the same environment now, and there's lots of poor old sheep getting a hard time with dogs and stuff like that when people go walking and not have them on leads, which isn't good either. So,
I just want to briefly ask about archaeology as well. Do you have a favourite kind of archaeological site within the coastal uplands or within the locality? Is there anything that comes to mind there?
A particular site. Well, there's things that we know, and there's things that we don't know. I think the things that we know, obviously, would say in the Carlow sense, you would say like the Brownshill Dolmen. That would be, that's the largest capstone in Europe in terms of size or weight. I think that's something we know of. When I think archaeology, I think less of built structures that are obvious. So I think less of the big houses, I think less of the viaducts, I think less of those things. That's less archaeology, so it's what's below the ground, I suppose. I think more about what's not known. I think there's a couple of good guys who've been recording stuff on the Blackstairs, local guys. One of them's a part of a couple of our groups, Edward Butler and Mick Monaghan, and they've recorded, they go walking in the mountains. Now, they hadn't on in years, still walking, but they've recorded a lot of sites, be it burn pits and various sites in the Blackstairs. And and I know they're liaising. I don't know who they're liaising with, whether it's UCD or whether it's National Monuments or whoever, but they do have that information, and I'm sure they've got it. They pass it on and share it. And I'd have more of an interest in that stuff, in what was. I know we don't tend to do very much archaeology, but I think I have an interest in that. What are we about to lose? And I would think when all the forests that were ever planted in the creature forests, God knows what was turned over there, and in the good of growing trees, that still they can't make money from. So you'd like to see them go native forest, but I no doubt there were sites, maybe even communities, settlements, less so castles, but there was different things that would have been turned over and moved on, as is gone on throughout the whole country, not just here, but everywhere, probably went on. I wouldn't mind knowing more about that, and I think even when we were in Wales, I'd love to know more about the connections of the peoples and the similarities between here and there, because I saw lots of similarities between Wales and this part of the world. And when you think about when we would have had a coastline, as in there was natural trade back and forth, so I'd say there were very strong links of peoples, because back to that time, all the way up to Scotland, all the way down West Wales, all the way down into Cornwall, that was all one Celtic kind of tribal people, and there had to have been strong connections there and similar settlements and similar ways. So I'd have a good interest in that area, and certainly there's always need for more exploration in some shape or form.
Can I just get your impressions? Actually, you mentioned maybe some of the similarities that you'd have seen between this area and Wales. What struck you?
Well, I don't know, it's not here. I suppose scenery. Like, we were in two places in Wales, so we were in the Camry Mountains and the Brecilli Hills. Camry Mountains are pointy, right? And so then I'll kind of parallel it to here, right? Wicklow Mountains are pointy. Brecilli Hills were roundy mountains, and in here we're this part of Blackstairs, we're roundy mountains. We don't have peaks, so we're more rounded soft tops. So in that sense, both areas were complementary and similar to each other. So when we were driving through the Brecilli Hills or Brecilli Mountains, it was just like driving through the Blackstairs. So it was very similar, and even because, like, obviously the sheep there, sheep here, the farming stock is similar, apart from the red kites. It's a similar space. So you could be, as we were driving through different areas, you could be in Ireland or you could be in Wales, wherever you were, and looking at it. So that was the most obvious similarity. I think when we went to the kite centre, and there was the mart there, the stalls, the food event, and there was a guy selling prints and pictures and hand-drawn prints, and I bought a print, and it was a dolmen. We've obviously got dolmens here, like we've got one in Carlow, we've a few in Carlow, and I thought, well, that's a factual link. The geography or the topography or whatever is a link, because obviously you're joining or whatever. But I think the dolmens were an obvious link going back thousands of years. I think there was that aspect of it. I think it was probably less Wales Ireland thing, because it could be applied anywhere. When you're to the end or an extreme of one county that has, on the other side of the county, that would have big ticket items, you're tempted to be the poorer cousin in terms of investments. Now, we're fortunate in Carlow, we're very lucky in Carlow, that we promote and encourage all areas. So, like I say, the Barrow or the Blackstairs, it's well supported. There's other areas now that are getting more support in Carlow, like Hackettstown and Rathvilly, and they should do, and get community investment, and that's going well. But if you look at the Brecilli Hills, they are kind of somewhat disadvantaged up there, and they would have been underfunded, and God help them, they're going to be less funded now due to Brexit. But they would struggle to the south of the county, which would be focused on the tourist, all the coasts and the beaches and all that kind of thing, and economics of, you know, ferries and trade and shipping and all that kind of stuff. And they would struggle up there. That's similar to Wexford. So if you take Wexford, it's coast and it's got some big tick items, and it comes up to the Blackstairs Mountains, Rathnure, Killan, and great communities along there. They would be the poorer cousins, and they would not, and it's less populated, so it's less vote catching and all that kind of stuff that goes with it. And you could say elements of Wicklow are the same. Like, so Wicklow has its coastlines, it's got its big towns, and it's got, as you come along, and it's got Glendalough and all that kind of thing. But then you come over towards Clonegall and Moyleisha and that area, they would struggle a little bit over Tinahee, a little. Fantastically beautiful spots, huge, great resources, great potential, but it would struggle a little. The same is in Meath. Big ticket items, Newgrange, get it, struggles a bit to the left. The same in Kildare, which doesn't have a coastline, racing, horse racing, but yet over to the left might struggle getting supported there. Little communities like Clonard and Meath might not get as much as it would, because it's less populated, less attraction, less vote catching. So I think that those are the kind of challenges, but the same as in Wales. And that was a similarity to here, but again, that's a general thing. The people, the language obviously is not Irish or Gaeilge, and I can't speak it, but it did inspire me to go back and start learning Irish, because the pride that they have in their language is phenomenal. We could learn tons from them, and I think that was eye-opening. And it's just, there was even a guy who spoke, his parents were Irish, and he grew up in Wales, and he was able to go to, in the same, pretty much the same 2 sentences, go Irish into Welsh into English and back in again, and shakers, and it was phenomenal, right? So he didn't have a full understanding of Irish, but he understood words over the shop in Rahana and that kind of thing. He was a tour guide. But I think the peoples are similar peoples, and the issues and concerns that they seem to have up in some of the parts of City Hills about tourists, I think we're more rooted in second home buyers from the UK. We're not in the same category, so they were much more resistant to tourism because they felt that was it. We're not in the same space, so we would look at it from an opportunity thing, but not for the second home thing, because we would probably equally be up in arms, like they would be, and they militant or whatever they would be about it. So I think there's layers of similarity, and then with the likes of Pan Celtic, which we had in Carlow last year, and have it again now next year, that pulls together all those Celtic peoples in a festival. And I was in a hotel in Seven Oaks at a meeting, and I was waiting when I was doing some work, and I was in a little room off the lobby, and there were a bunch of people came in, and they were from Wales, and they were starting to practice because they were staying in all the hotels, and they were starting to, I said, would it be okay if we practice some? I said, crack on. And it was a pleasure sitting there doing a little bit of work, because I didn't need to over concentrate on it, and they were playing and they were singing songs in rehearsing for one of the events, the opening event that was on, I think, later that night. And it's a similar I won't say romantic, but a similar cultural heritage, and then back to your saying, similar natural heritage. And I think there are common links there, and I think meeting the peoples was important. I think for sustainability, I think the tour guides were important, and I think there's no reason why, while we are more than happy to go a holiday down to Kerry or Cork or in Ireland, it's not that much of and a ferry's grand, not to go over to Wales and to encourage people to come from Wales to us for a weekend and to develop that, because there are places to see, and God knows I've been brothers and sisters, 9 of them living over in England at different times, and you'd be getting the ferry and you're just flying through Holyhead. You couldn't even tell you, apart from, unless you're driving, you see big hill, mountains, that's it. You never stopped. Like, we could do it stopping in Wales for a little bit, and the same here.
Can I ask about folklore in whatever form? If is there particular folklore that's particular to this area, or things that you might have heard when you were growing up, or more recently?
Probably me less so, insofar as I wouldn't have as much content, or very little content, compared to the average person in my shop, because they would grown up with it and it'd be in their head. I think there is a lot of folklore here, within living memory but distant memory. There'll be folklore around the big house, Cornwall Brady, and folklore that would go back as far as 1798, and in stories that would have come on from then, because that played a big part in obviously the Wexford Rebellion, and involvement. So I think from that point of view, there's a lot around that space. There's also folklore. It's like you mentioned, like we're talked about interviewing people on the other side of the Blackstairs. Like there's two Americans coming over to here, and they're distant relatives, distant cousins of mine, and back and forth things since 2015 or 16. The uncle passed away, but he had been contacted, and I ended up getting involved in the family tree thing. So I did some looking up for him and sent it to the Americans. But they're coming over, and they're Kennedys on my side, my mother's side, so they'd be kind of connected to the Kennedys in the village who aren't here anymore, or up in Rossacurra. But like there's certain folklore that would have come about then, but I know from looking through it when I had to go through different things and see where people who'd come out of here and they married someone and they would have lived, they're dead now, but lived in Rathnure or in Killan. Like there's a local guy who's from here, spends more time probably in in the GA club than he may spend at home, or certainly in the times in the past. Willie Eustace, he's from over Killan direction, he's living over that kind of side of the mountain. So there were always the meetings of peoples on the mountain or socially, and so there's huge links like that. So the folklore isn't folklore Michael, it's folklore of the mountain or of with other communities. So like it's like I know I bang on about this a little, but the fact that it divides the mountain, the connections are stronger than any CUPHAT project will ever produce, because they go back so long. People may travel further, but they travelled less then, and the community is a mountain community of villages and less so towns, but more villages and communities who worked together, shared together, met together, danced together, socialised together, played each other together, and those kind of things stem from the past. So folklore comes up through that, and behaviours and all that can come up for it. So there's strong links, and there's a number of links with Wexford where people have married in from there to there, and they would have only met by going to the other side of the mountain, and vice versa. So yes, I'd have an element of understanding folklore. I think there's a lot about the big house, and its folklore locally, and stories go back to whether the house was burnt down, or whether it goes back to 1798 and a bunch of rebels from the area who are due to be hunged, and their sentence was commuted, and provided the road was built. It's called the Croppy Road, and there's a song, the Croppy Boys, based on Cornwall Brady, and that's it's part of here and the experiences here. So there is a lot of folklore that focuses on that space, because that's probably the last link in memory of it. Modern wise, probably yes. So I'm sure there's all kinds of stories of different people and different characters who fortunately are no longer with us. Like there's a place down just as you go down to the village on the right hand side in front of the house, the priest's house, the parochial house, called the Picket Corner, and I would remember that as a kid coming down. There would be a bunch of men there now after mass, and they'd be standing there having a chat, and that was like a social point. Now there's still a few handful might be there on a Sunday, not very many, but that would have been a gathering point, and it would have been a social point. So they would have maintained folklore, and they could have been standing at that corner for 200 years. Not the same lads now, but 200 years of stories going on. Like as a social history group, them talking, they're perpetuating the verbal storytelling thing. Might get coloured here and there, but they're maintaining folklore. And for those that are interested, like Carlow Historical Society is fantastic. Archaeological Society, Chaz, they're fantastic. They do fantastic work, fantastic talks. And as long as we've got those, I think folklore won't die, even if the computer does.
You mentioned the connections between the two sides of the mountain there, and we're in late July, just I suppose around the corner from Mountain Sunday or Frothin Sunday, and this notion of mountain communities from each side kind of kind of coming together. It's I suppose the part that the mountain has kind of played in local life over centuries, I guess, has been huge. It's in terms of how it kind of shapes things.
Well, I would think so. And again, okay, I'm a dub, and probably will be a dub till I die, or be a blow-in roots or a blow-in dub till I die, even though there is roots. But no, I would think so. In my opinion, I would think yes. I would think the mountain or the land provided, but it also died. You die. It kind of tried to kill you as well. So like, it was a harsh environment. Like I wouldn't have much exposure to mountain life, but I do know, like, it's a hardier breed that's in a mountainy area, because it's a harder life, or the environment or the weather might be harder, and it's just a more difficult life. And I think that's true. I think rural, it's a challenge. It's hard work, and it's got easier with machinery. But you can imagine what it was like, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, but 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It was hard work, and you see those hills there, and like, even in my time coming down here, the lads will be up there bringing sheep, or walking up that hill. It would kill me tomorrow if I went up, but walking up the hill is a challenge, and you're going up and down that, numbers of times a week. That's a workout in itself, and that's hard in the body, but it's also strengthens the body. So they're up there and they're bringing stuff up and down and whatever before tractors, and so in that sense, definitely the mountain is a challenging thing. So it gives and it takes in that sense. But sure, I think that's the same of any area really. But here particularly, they'll be tough enough people insofar as hardy people. Because life at times in the past would have been hard.
What's the best thing about living here?
Space. I'd say space, people, and in the sense that I'm fortunate enough that, well, I got involved with one thing. I'm fortunate and unfortunate at the same time. Fortunate in that when I got involved in one thing, it led on to another thing, and I was interested in what I was doing, and I kind of threw myself into it, and I got to run at some. I was able to run with some ideas, and we were able to do some good stuff, and that's a team thing. Unfortunate in a sense that I could throw too much of myself into stuff, and that would disadvantage me in terms of distract me from other things, like getting some other things done that are supposed to be done, or I can be a little full on. But I've been fortunate enough to be involved. I'm involved with the school. I'm on the board of the school because of the skill set. We know kiddies, a couple of donkeys, but I don't think they can go to school. But I think I'm happy to help out there, and there have been a number of projects, and we're just currently one going on there at the moment. So I like helping people, and I generally wouldn't turn anyone away, and as long as my time's not wasted, I help people, or if I'm restricted on people or whatever. So I think in that sense that's been a nice way to connect. But I'm open. I'm not closed. I can be I can be a hard taskmaster at times, and I can be I'm not pushover. But at the same time, this is a great space. So it's a great space. It's space. It's scenery. It's people. It's environment. And there are a good bunch of people down here.
What's the thing you'd most like to change about the area?
Well, I suppose it's not up to an individual to decide that, because everybody can have their opinion, and all individuals are entitled to their opinion. It's for people to decide it, for those that are interested or bothered. A lot of people are busy with life, and a lot of people even if you have a consultation or if there's a meeting, you might only get a handful to turning up. If it's something that's causing an impact, or people see that's going to cause an impact, if they don't turn up, they turn up at the next time when they know more about it. But I wouldn't like to change anything. But if there was one thing I'd say I'd like to see for the benefit of the future, I would like to see that it could be certain aspects could be sustainable into the future. And I wonder sometimes, not so much for here, I think it's a general thing, it's not a reflection on here at all. I wonder sometimes about communities. I heard a thing recently where, and I must say where I heard it wasn't nothing to do with my show, but it's where I heard, the way everything consolidates, like they're closing banks and they're closing down post offices or have been closing down post offices, and it's withdrawal of services. And we were brought on a tour a while back and over to Ballyhora, and they'd done great, the community development in Ballyhora, leader support and all that crack. And we went to a community where it lost its shops, and there was no shop, nothing in it, but they had a community hall. So a few of them got together and they ended up putting a shop in the community hall, in the community centre. And it wasn't a big community centre, it was a small one. And they had a shop there where they sold the essentials, milk, bread, that kind of stuff, papers. And you could get a cup of tea and they did a little coffee tea. And it was voluntary run. And then we were brought to another place at Ballyhale, Billy's Tea Rooms in Ballyhale. And that was a good sized village, not quite town maybe, but good sized village, much bigger than here. And all the buildings that are in it, they had no shop. So then the tea rooms, they leased the property from the council and they converted it to Billy's Tea Rooms. And they had positive and negative experiences from the whole voluntary paid employee thing. But they did something about it. So I know communities can bounce back. But the thing, I was saying that I had heard a guy was saying, and he was in an officialdom capacity, again, it's not necessarily Carlo, and they were saying that they were talking about merging community centres, and I didn't like the sound of that, and I thought this is a perspective that may be developing or may exist, but that they were referring and saying, well, obviously, it won't be necessarily possible for the councils to support so many communities, that it was almost to rationalise or consolidate communities or community spaces. They weren't referring to it was a little like you get these community grants, and if you can imagine 100 communities in a county and there's 100 grants going out for €1,000, it was always about rationalising the amount of groups they give the grants to. And I didn't like where that was going in my head, and I didn't like it because I immediately thought, well, okay, apply it locally, Michael, and then you apply Fenna or you apply Drumfay or apply Kildavin. You say, well, okay, we know the way the churches are going, that churches are going to be, it's got 4 churches, it'll be down to 3 churches, to 2 churches, to 1 church, and then everybody's going to Bagnallstown, everybody's going to Carlow for Mass. And you can understand the logistics of that. But community isn't moving. Community is where community is. And if that was to be applied, like with Kildavin, and these aren't the places that were on top
no,
of
sure, but in
but if you
setting it in
geographically
a
to set it, that Kildavin and Michael would say, or Fenna and Michael, or Fenna and Kildavin, that they, in order community to do so, they have to go to a place. That's not on. And I wouldn't like communities, some communities which are already in that situation, to end up being in such a weak state that they haven't tried to insulate them or help themselves to be sustainable in some way, to avoid that ending up like that. And it's complex, but that would annoy the bejesus out of me now, and that'd be one of those red flag items to me. So they want to be bringing a lot of resources now to try and make that happen. If it was a space that I was in and people didn't want that to happen, they better bring the big guns. That's all I can say to you. But it is possibly a thing that starts, and then a thing that ends up, and that could be the way things could go. But just I hope not.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about, Damian, that you wanted to bring up or you wanted to mention?
Not particularly. No, I think. I suppose the only thing I would say is, and it's whoever hears this, I think when people come to an area, and I suppose speaking as with roots person, I think sometimes it's easy to fall into, when you come from the outside or from an area, not from this area, and you could be from another country, you could be from America, England, could be from anywhere, or you could be from a city, or you could be from, it could be an age demographic, young couple coming into an area from God knows where. I think what you have to do is you have to read the location, you have to read the locality, and you've got to rub along with them. And I think they are moving at a certain pace. They're not moving any slower, any quicker, or whatever, but they have a rhythm, and you have to respect the rhythm, and which means you have to respect the community, and you have to respect the people in the community. And it's easy to see, and I've seen it, not here, but I'm aware of it in other places, that where it could be a new housing estate or whatever, and where people would come into an area, and you could have people, they would have a certain higher energy, and they come in and they want to get involved, and then suddenly they're just coming along with a higher energy, and the energies haven't met their equilibrium yet, and it can knock certain things out of kilter, and you won't knock the existing out of kilter, but what you'll do is you might get bounced away, or you may not be embraced as much. And I think, but you have to kind of respect what's existing, and that has been building cultural, natural heritage that has been evolving for generations. You've got to respect that, and you've got to rub along with it, and that could apply to when you join. I know people who, not down here, but I know people who in Dublin who joined the GAA club, and they had a certain energy, and they're bouncing around the place, but like the energy, that particular GAA club had its own energy, and its own energy was its own pace, and this person wouldn't have been involved in the sport before, so wouldn't maybe have had that space, and it went along, but they eventually left and they went to another GAA thing because they were just rubbing it against the wrong way. You've got to respect. It's got to be about respect. So I think, but it's a flip side. Equally, the existing institutions or have to respect another person's rhythm, but equally they will have priority, I'm sure, because it makes sense. But it's about respecting each other's rhythm, and finding your space and place, and maybe you have to prove yourself a little, and maybe that's part of it, and that's fair, because at the end of the day they're doing what they're doing here for a long time and doing it well, and at times they may need help, and maybe they wouldn't need help, and maybe you respect that they have their way. Lots of wisdom, there's lots of experience in that sense. So
that's brilliant, Damian, thanks a million.